Why does this state have a law rejecting buildings for being too ugly? A lake monster protected by two governments, and a capital city with no McDonald's. Yet somehow nobody talks about it. Welcome to 71 Dumbest Facts from Vermont that make no sense, where we expose wild verified history, like the time this state was its own country, absurd laws still on the books today, and the myths you believed your whole life about America's most underestimated state. Hit subscribe before we reveal the one snowflake photograph that changed science forever. 1. Most people assume Vermont was always just a quiet American state, but here is the part that gets ignored completely. Vermont was a fully independent country for 14 straight years. From 1777 to 1791, it ran its own army, printed its own currency, and operated its own post office with zero permission from America. The Founding Fathers were still debating what the country even was, and Vermont was already out here living its best sovereign life entirely alone. 2. Vermont farmers will warn you the roads get lonely, but here is what they actually mean. Vermont has more cows per square mile than human beings. If you drive through rural Vermont at dusk, the odds of meeting a Holstein before meeting a neighbor are genuinely not in your favor. Scientists confirmed this, and locals accepted it completely. City visitors from New York show up expecting charming towns, and instead get 400 acres of cows staring at them with absolute zero interest in making conversation. 3. Most people think Walmart just waltzed into every American state without a fight, but Vermont made them wait and suffer for it. Vermont was the only U.S. state with absolutely no Walmart until 1995, and residents did not just complain about it quietly. They took it to courts, held town votes, and organized formal opposition campaigns for years. A giant retail corporation worth billions of dollars was genuinely held off by Vermont locals who simply refused to budge until they absolutely had to. 4. A man in Vermont once legally married a tree, and this is not a metaphor or an exaggeration. He did it as a protest against a local land development project and filed the paperwork completely seriously. The local government was then forced to formally acknowledge the marriage, because the legal process had been followed correctly. Somewhere in Vermont, there is an official record of a man and a tree being united, and the developer who triggered all of this had to sit there and watch it happen. 5. Before the United States even officially existed as a finished country, Vermont had already banned slavery in its constitution in 1777. While the Founding Fathers were still negotiating and compromising with slaveholding states, Vermont just went ahead and made it illegal outright. No lengthy debate, no political dance, just a clean prohibition written directly into the founding document. Vermont essentially looked at the moral argument, decided it was obvious, and moved on, while the rest of the country spent another century figuring it out. 6. Vermont produces roughly 50% of the entire United States maple syrup supply, and does it while being one of the smallest states in the country. Every other American state combined still cannot match what Vermont pulls out of its maple trees each season. This is not a seasonal hobby or a tourism gimmick. It is a full industrial operation that feeds the pancake habits of an entire nation. Canada gets most of the global credit for maple syrup, but inside American borders, Vermont is running the whole operation completely unchallenged. 7. Montpelier is the capital city of Vermont, and it is the only state capital in the entire United States with no McDonald's anywhere inside city limits. No drive-through, no golden arches, no late-night quarter pounder available at any hour. Locals have actively worked to keep it that way and treat the absence like a point of civic pride. Every other state capital in America has surrendered at least one location to the franchise, but Montpelier has held the line completely and seems to enjoy telling people about it. 8. A Vermont town once elected a dog named Bossy Gillis as honorary mayor and treated the entire event as a completely legitimate civic occasion. There was a ceremony, there were celebrations, and the town formally recognized the appointment as an official community moment. No one involved appeared to be embarrassed about any of it. Vermont has a long tradition of small towns, making very unusual democratic decisions, but electing a dog to municipal office and then celebrating it seriously might be the peak achievement of that entire tradition. 9. In 1859, Vermont launched the first mobile library in American history, and it was exactly as charming and impractical as it sounds. A horse-drawn wagon filled with books traveled from farm to farm across rural Vermont, delivering reading material to people who had no way to reach a library building. Farmers would come out of their fields and borrow novels while their horse rested. It sounds like something invented for a children's book, but it actually happened, and Vermont did it before any other state even considered the idea. 10. Vermont has a law on its books making it illegal to paint a horse, and that law has never been officially removed or repealed by anyone. No modern Vermont legislature has looked at that statute, recognized how bizarre it sounds in the 21st century, and taken the time to strike it out. The law just sits there quietly in the legal record doing nothing but existing. Somewhere a Vermont attorney knows exactly which section it lives in and has been waiting years for someone to actually test it in a real courtroom. 11. Tropical birds have absolutely no business surviving Vermont winters, but nobody told the monk parakeets that. A wild parakeet population has been thriving through brutal negative 20-degree temperatures in Vermont for decades, and biologists genuinely cannot explain how they got there in the first place. Scientists have proposed multiple theories. Locals have proposed even stranger ones, and the parakeets remain completely unbothered by the entire academic argument happening around them while they sit in Vermont snow looking perfectly comfortable and entirely at home. 12. Running the smallest state economy in the entire Northeast sounds manageable until someone pulls out the Disney comparison. Vermont's entire GDP is smaller than the annual revenue of a single Disney theme park. One park, 1 year, more money than everything Vermont produces combined. Vermont has farms, ski resorts, cheese operations, and a fully functioning government all running on a budget that Mickey Mouse could theoretically outspend from a single Florida location without breaking a noticeable sweat on the quarterly earnings report. 13. Barely 300,000 people lived in Vermont when the Civil War started, and Vermont still managed to send more soldiers per capita than any other northern state. That means Vermont was pulling farmers from fields, sons from families, and workers from every industry it had, and marching them south into the bloodiest conflict in American history. Other states had larger armies in raw numbers, but when you adjust for population, Vermont was emptying itself out, at a rate absolutely nobody else came close to matching. 14. Farmers across Vermont did not take the apple cider pasteurization law quietly, and what followed made national headlines for months straight. The moment Vermont passed a regulation requiring all apple cider to be pasteurized, orchard owners and rural communities organized against it with the full seriousness of a constitutional crisis. Press from across the country arrived to cover farmers fighting a food safety law like it was a revolutionary act, and Vermont delivered exactly that level of committed dramatic energy without a single moment of embarrassment. 15. Every state in America carries debt because running a government that serves people costs money. And debt is basically the permanent default condition of public finance. Vermont cleared its completely. At one point, Vermont carried an official state debt of exactly $0, a financial achievement so rare in American government history that it almost sounds made up when you say it out loud. Every other state treasurer in the country heard about it and quietly set down whatever they were holding and stared at nothing for a moment. 16. Somewhere on the Washington Monument, there is a visible color difference, and Vermont granite is the reason why. Vermont stone was actually used during construction of the monument, but when workers compared it against the existing sections already in place, the shade did not match at all. Construction stopped, a different source was found, and builders moved on, but the color shift stayed permanently visible on the finished structure. Vermont made it into one of America's most famous landmarks, and then got swapped out halfway through the job. 17. Nobody expected the Morgan horse to beat animals twice its size, but Vermont's official state animal has been doing exactly that for generations. In formal pulling competitions, the Morgan horse was tested directly against draft horses with a massive size and weight advantage, and the Morgan won. Vermont farmers treated this outcome as completely obvious and unsurprising, because they had known about the breed's stubborn toughness for years. Small, determined, stronger than it looks, and refuses to be outworked, which is essentially Vermont describing itself through an animal. 18. California has 40 times more people than Vermont, massive industrial dairy farms, and the largest state economy in America, and Vermont still beats it in cheese exports. Vermont cheese outsells all of California's cheese output combined, and the math somehow keeps landing the same way every single time anyone runs the numbers. California producers have enormous infrastructure, and Vermont has hills, small farms, and dairy farmers who treat cheese-making with something closer to religious conviction than agricultural practice, and apparently that combination wins every time. 19. Somewhere in Vermont, there is a graveyard with a formal tombstone for a chicken, and the burial in 1887 was treated as a completely legitimate community event. A printed obituary was prepared, neighbors showed up to the ceremony, and the stone was placed with the same care given to any other grave in that yard. Nobody in attendance appeared to find any part of this unusual or worth questioning. The chicken had clearly earned genuine community affection, and the stone is reportedly still standing today. 20. Vermont was still a fully independent sovereign nation in 1777 when its militia showed up and defeated the British at the Battle of Bennington. These were not American soldiers fighting for the United States because Vermont was not part of the United States yet. They were Vermonters fighting for their own separate country against a British force moving through territory they considered entirely theirs. America later folded this victory into its own revolutionary story, but Vermont technically won that battle as a foreign nation, doing a favor for a neighbor. 21. Vermont takes its maple syrup so seriously that the state created its own grading system stricter than official U.S. federal food standards. Inspectors can reject entire batches purely based on color shade variations that most people would never notice standing in a grocery aisle. The federal government sets a bar, and Vermont looks at that bar, decides it is not high enough, and builds a taller one. No other state has bothered doing this for any food product at this level. 22. Essex County in Vermont holds the title of smallest county by population in the entire United States, and the numbers make it feel almost fictional. Fewer people live there than in most American high schools. There are high school football stadiums in Texas with larger populations than an entire Vermont county that appears on official federal maps as a legitimate administrative unit with elected officials and a functioning local government doing real work for almost nobody to notice. 23. A Vermont resident once filed a lawsuit against a snowstorm in small claims court for property damages, and a local judge formally agreed to hear the case. This was not thrown out immediately as obviously ridiculous. A real judge sat down, reviewed the paperwork, and gave the snowstorm its day in court before ultimately dismissing the claim. The person who filed it was completely serious throughout the entire process, and Vermont's legal system treated the situation with more patience than most people would consider reasonable. 24. Chester Arthur became the 21st President of the United States and spent years of his presidency actively lying about where he was born. Arthur was born in Fairfield, Vermont, but repeatedly claimed New York as his birthplace during his political career for reasons that historians still debate. A sitting American president looked at Vermont, decided it was not a useful origin story for his ambitions, and simply told a different one. Vermont has the birth records. Arthur had the nerve. Arthur won that argument for a while. 25. Vermont has more craft breweries per capita than any other state in America, and it beats Wisconsin and Colorado on a population-adjusted basis, which is genuinely difficult to believe. Wisconsin has beer culture built into its identity. Colorado turned craft brewing into an industry. Vermont looked at both of them, did the math per person, and came out ahead of everyone. A state with fewer people than most major American cities is somehow producing more breweries relative to its population than anywhere else in the country. 26. Vermont's state legislature looked at all the serious issues facing modern government, and at some point decided to also designate an official state soil. Tunbridge soil now has full legal recognition as Vermont's official dirt, and this required an actual formal vote by actual elected officials who had other things they could have been doing. No other state has taken soil this seriously at the legislative level. Vermont essentially gave dirt the same ceremonial treatment it gives state birds and state flowers, and nobody stopped them. 27. A Vermont farm started offering goat yoga as a paid ticketed experience, and the first session sold out within minutes of being announced online. Before anyone could process what had happened, the concept had spread to all 50 states and become a genuine national wellness trend. Vermont did not invent yoga, And Vermont did not invent goats, but Vermont combined them in a field, charged people money to participate, and accidentally created something the entire country wanted. The goats themselves had no opinion and showed up anyway. 28. Vermont operates a full bicameral state legislature, a complete government apparatus, and an entire functioning state infrastructure while having a smaller population than the city of Louisville, Kentucky. Louisville is one city. Vermont is an entire state with senators, representatives, a governor, courts, agencies, and committees all running simultaneously for a population that Louisville could absorb without noticeably changing its own city census numbers. Vermont has all the machinery of statehood running at full capacity for a crowd that most American cities would consider a slow Tuesday. 29. Lake Champlain's legendary monster champ is officially protected by formal resolutions passed by both Vermont and New York state governments, making it legally protected on both shores simultaneously. Two separate state legislatures looked at a creature that has never been confirmed to exist, drafted official government documents, voted on them, and passed them into the public record. Champ cannot be harmed, captured, or disturbed under resolutions that real elected officials signed into existence for a lake monster that may or may not actually live in that water. 30. Vermont banned the sale of margarine for nearly 4 decades as a direct legislative move to protect the dairy farming industry from a cheaper butter substitute. Legislators looked at margarine, identified it as a threat to Vermont's dominant economic sector, and made selling it illegal for decades. Grocery stores could not stock it. Residents who wanted it had to leave the state or go without. A spreading product that most Americans considered completely harmless was treated in Vermont like a genuine threat to the social order. 31. Somewhere in Vermont, there is a real town named Mosquitoville, and the settlers who named it were not being cute or ironic about it. Early settlers chose that name because the insect population in that area was so severe it genuinely threatened their ability to survive and build a community there. They did not pick a charming name about the landscape or the river nearby. They looked at what was actually killing them every summer and decided that was the most honest name available. 32. Vermont built the first publicly funded state school system in American history and wrote it directly into its 1777 Constitution before the federal government even existed as a functioning institution. While the rest of the country was still figuring out what America was going to look like, Vermont had already decided every child deserved access to public education and made it official law. The Federal Department of Education would not exist for another 2 centuries, but Vermont had already handled the concept entirely on its own. 33. Vermont consistently ranks among the most photographed states in America every single autumn foliage season, and still manages to be the least visited state in all of New England. People see the pictures, share the pictures, tell everyone how beautiful it looks, and then travel somewhere else entirely. Vermont produces some of the most circulated landscape photography in the country and converts almost none of that visual attention into actual tourist visits at the rate every other New England state manages without even trying particularly hard. 34. 50 years before most American states extended voting rights to men without property, Vermont had already written that protection into its 1777 Constitution, while other states were still gatekeeping civic participation behind land ownership and wealth requirements. Vermont looked at that system, decided it was wrong, and removed the barrier entirely. This was not a progressive reform that came after decades of debate. Vermont put it in the founding document from the very beginning, like it was the obvious thing to do, and moved on. 35. A black bear in Grafton, Vermont, broke into 10 different cars in a single night, and wildlife officials liked him enough to give him a name rather than immediately hunt him down. The bear was identified, tracked, monitored, and never successfully trapped, despite serious professional efforts to catch him. He kept living in the area after the incident with full knowledge that humans were actively trying to relocate him, and simply declined to cooperate with any of the plans made on his behalf by the state. 36. Vermont soldiers at the Battle of Gettysburg were positioned on the far left flank of the entire Union line, and military historians credit them with preventing a complete collapse of the Union position. If that flank had broken, the Confederate Army would have rolled through the exposed side, and the entire battle could have ended differently. Vermont sent soldiers from one of the smallest population states in the North to hold the most vulnerable position at one of the most consequential battles in American history. 37. Vermont is the only state in the entire country with a legally designated official flavor written directly into state statutes, and that flavor is maple. Not a state food, not a state dish, not a state ingredient, but an official flavor with full legal standing on the books. Every other state has state birds and state flowers and state trees, but Vermont looked at those categories and decided a flavor deserved the same formal governmental recognition, and then actually went through the legislative process to make it happen. 38. There is a road along the Connecticut River where the Vermont state line runs directly through the front yards of residential properties, meaning some porches are technically located in New Hampshire. Homeowners on that road wake up every morning in one state and walk to their mailbox in another. No wall, no fence, no dramatic border crossing, just a legal line cutting through someone's lawn that determines which state government gets to collect their taxes and which state laws apply to their front steps. 39. Multiple Vermont municipalities banned pinball machines in the 1940s, and local officials classified them as gambling devices, specifically designed to corrupt the moral character of young people. This was not a fringe opinion held by one eccentric town council. Several separate Vermont communities looked at a machine that shoots a metal ball between bumpers and concluded it was a gateway to moral ruin, serious enough to require a formal legal prohibition. Pinball was treated in Vermont with the same energy usually reserved for genuinely dangerous criminal activity. 40. Thomas Davenport was a blacksmith from Brandon, Vermont, who received the first American patent for a practical electric motor in 1837, and the U.S. Patent Office assigned it number 132. A small-town Vermont blacksmith figured out electric motors before the industrial establishment did and filed the paperwork to prove it. The patent changed the direction of industrial history in ways Davenport probably did not fully anticipate while working in his shop. Brandon, Vermont produced one of the most consequential inventors in American technological history, almost entirely by accident. 41. A Vermont secession movement called the Second Vermont Republic formally petitioned for independence from the United States in 2005 and actually gained measurable public support from real Vermont residents. This was not a joke movement or a political stunt performed by one eccentric person in a basement. Organizers held meetings, published documents, and built a genuine following of people who looked at America in 2005 and decided Vermont would honestly be better off handling things completely alone without the rest of the country involved. 42. Vermont was harvesting natural ice from its frozen lakes in the 1800s and shipping it all the way to Caribbean islands in South America, where it was sold as a luxury commodity to wealthy buyers. People in tropical climates were paying serious money for blocks of frozen Vermont lake water because refrigeration did not exist yet and ice was genuinely valuable. Vermont farmers who spent winters cutting frozen chunks out of lakes were participating in a legitimate international luxury trade that sounds completely absurd from a modern perspective. 43. Vermont banned billboard advertising statewide in 1968 and has maintained that ban completely for over 5 decades, making it one of only 4 states in America to prohibit them entirely. Driving through Vermont means driving through landscapes without giant roadside advertisements interrupting every half mile. No fast food signs, no mattress sale banners, no political advertisement boards covering hillsides. Vermont decided in 1968 that its scenery was worth protecting from commercial signage and has defended that decision against every legal and commercial challenge brought against it since. 44. Glastonbury, Vermont was once a functioning town that eventually lost so many residents, it had to be officially removed from all administrative maps entirely. The collapse happened gradually and then completely. But what made Glastonbury genuinely strange was that several residents disappeared under circumstances that were never satisfactorily explained to anyone's satisfaction. The town did not just fade out economically the way abandoned towns normally do. People left, some people vanished, and Vermont eventually erased the town from official records like it had simply stopped existing. 45. Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys captured Fort Ticonderoga from the British in 1775 without firing a single shot, and the British commander surrendered before dawn still wearing his nightclothes. Allen reportedly demanded the surrender in the name of the Great Jehovah, and the Continental Congress, which was a remarkably dramatic thing to say to a man in his pajamas at 4 in the morning. The British handed over a strategically critical fort because Vermont men showed up before sunrise and asked for it confidently. 46. Vermont's Abenaki people lived in the region for over 10,000 years before any European ever set foot in the area, and Vermont still did not officially recognize them as a native tribe until 2011. 10,000 years of continuous presence in the same geographic territory, and the state government took until the 21st century to formally acknowledge that history in any official legal capacity. The Abenaki did not arrive in Vermont. They were Vermont long before the state existed to have any opinion about it. 47. Victory. Vermont has a population of under 70 people and still maintains a fully elected board of selectmen, a functioning town clerk position, and a real annual municipal budget that gets debated and approved. 70 people running a complete local government with all the formal structures of much larger municipalities because Vermont law requires it, and Vermont towns take that requirement seriously, regardless of how small the actual population gets. Victory is technically governing itself with the same institutional seriousness as towns 50 times its size. 48. One rooster's morning routine became a Vermont legal matter that traveled all the way to a state superior court after a judge initially ruled the bird qualified as illegal noise pollution under local ordinance. The rooster owner refused to accept the verdict and appealed with complete seriousness. Actual judges with actual law degrees then spent real working hours reviewing the legal status of one bird's daily schedule. Vermont's Superior Court produced a formal written ruling about a rooster and filed it in the official record. 49. Slavery was abolished. Same-sex civil unions were legalized before most of America considered it imaginable, and Vermont still waited until 2010 to elect its first female governor. The gap between Vermont's historic firsts and that particular milestone is genuinely jarring when you line everything up together. Vermont moved faster than the entire country on almost every major progressive milestone, and then took an unusually long time arriving at that one specific achievement for reasons the state has never fully explained to anyone's satisfaction. 50. No NFL team, no NBA team, no MLB team, no NHL team, nothing at all from any of the 4 major American professional sports leagues calls Vermont home. Every other state either hosts a franchise directly or shares one with a neighbor, but Vermont sits completely outside the entire professional sports geography of America. Residents who want a home team have to adopt someone else's entirely. Vermont is the only state where rooting for the home team is a geographical impossibility by definition. 51. Somewhere in Vermont's official legal record, there is a statute making it technically illegal to tie a giraffe to a telephone pole, and no legislature has ever bothered removing it. The law sits there quietly doing absolutely nothing, protecting telephone poles from giraffes, in a state where no wild giraffe has ever been reported anywhere near one. Every session, Vermont legislators could strike it out, and every session they apparently find other priorities and leave the giraffe telephone pole situation legally unresolved. 52. Older than the Declaration of Independence itself, several of Vermont's covered wooden bridges were constructed before America officially existed, and they are still carrying real weight across Vermont rivers today. These are not decorative tourist installations built to look historical and charming. They are original functioning structures that were already standing when George Washington was alive. Vermont has been maintaining wooden bridges longer than the United States has been maintaining its own existence, and the bridges are honestly holding up better. 53. Coca-Cola spends more money on marketing in a single year than Vermont spends running its entire state government, and the gap between those two numbers is not remotely close. One beverage corporation selling sugar water outspends a fully functioning American state with a governor, legislature, courts, schools, and complete public infrastructure. Vermont operates everything a state government is legally required to provide on a budget that Coca-Cola considers a reasonable annual advertising expense and apparently does not think twice about. 54. Blowing up their own bridge was apparently a completely reasonable military decision for Vermont militiamen who destroyed the Winooski River crossing to slow a British advance and then rebuilt it within 2 days. They demolished their own infrastructure, camped in the wreckage, constructed a functional replacement from available materials in 48 hours and continued the campaign without significant delay. The British were slowed, Vermont was not, and the militiamen treated rapid bridge reconstruction as a routine part of conducting military operations. 55. Without any court ordering them to act, Vermont's legislature looked at same-sex civil unions in April 2000, held the vote, and passed the law through straightforward democratic process. Other states that eventually extended similar rights did so because judges ruled existing laws unconstitutional and forced legislative action. Vermont did not wait for a judicial mandate pushing them from outside. The legislature identified the issue, made the decision independently, and became the first state in America to legalize civil unions entirely on its own. 56. The Fairbanks Museum in Vermont was built in 1891 and contains one of the most genuinely bizarre natural history collections in the entire country, including thousands of individual insects arranged deliberately to form portraits of United States presidents. Someone sat down with thousands of pinned insects and constructed presidential portraits out of them with enough precision that the faces are actually recognizable. The museum built around this collection presents it with complete seriousness as a legitimate cultural and scientific institution worthy of public attention and formal preservation. 57. Vermont is home to the Hyde log cabin built in 1783 on Grand Isle, which is considered the oldest surviving log cabin in America, and it is still standing and open to visitors today. This structure was built 2 years after Vermont joined the United States, and it has outlasted every political administration, every war, every economic collapse, and every major shift in American life since the 18th century. People can walk inside a building that was already old when Abraham Lincoln was born. 58. Vermont produced more than 200 generals for the Union Army during the Civil War, which is a staggering number for one of the smallest population states fighting in that conflict. 200 generals from a state with barely 300,000 total residents means Vermont was generating military leadership at a rate that defied its size in every measurable way. Larger states with bigger populations and more resources were producing fewer generals per capita than this small northeastern state that most people forget exists. 59. Vermont passed the nation's first environmental land use law in 1970, called Act 250, which gave the state government actual legal power to block any development project deemed harmful to the Vermont landscape. A private developer could draw up plans, secure financing, and line up contractors, and Vermont could still say no based purely on environmental impact. No other state had given itself that authority at that point, and Vermont used it immediately and consistently from the moment the law took effect. 60. Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon Church, was born in Sharon, Vermont in 1805, and a large granite monument marks the exact location of his birth today. Vermont produced the man who founded one of the largest and fastest-growing religious movements in American history, and most people have no idea the origin story starts in a small Vermont town. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has millions of members worldwide, and its entire founding narrative traces directly back to rural Vermont. 61. Consistently holding the lowest crime rate of any state east of the Mississippi River for over 3 consecutive decades is not something Vermont advertises loudly, but the numbers keep confirming it anyway. This is not a recent development or a lucky statistical year. Larger states with bigger police budgets and more resources have watched their own numbers fluctuate for 30 years without ever matching what Vermont maintains as a completely routine baseline that nobody in the state seems particularly surprised by anymore. 62. Passengers once boarded a scheduled train service in Vermont that ran directly onto the frozen surface of Lake Champlain during winter months. Like this was a completely unremarkable transportation arrangement. Engineers calculated the ice thickness, determined a locomotive could cross safely, and apparently considered that sufficient justification to publish a timetable for trains crossing a frozen lake. The train would pull onto the ice, cross to the other side, and arrive on schedule as if running on water that had temporarily hardened was standard railroad practice. 63. Founded in Vermont in 1926, the Bread Loaf Writers Conference is the oldest continuously running literary gathering in the entire United States, and Robert Frost attended across multiple decades as both student and faculty. Frost spent so much time at Breadloaf that his presence became permanently woven into the institution's identity. A century of American literary history has been happening every single year in Vermont, and most Americans have never heard the name Breadloaf despite it predating almost every cultural institution they do recognize. 64. Legally rejecting a new building purely for being ugly is something only Vermont's government can actually do, and developers have no guaranteed right to build anything the state considers visually offensive. Any construction visible from a public road must pass aesthetic review by state officials before it can proceed. An architect can produce a structurally sound, fully financed, legally compliant design, and Vermont can examine it, decide it clashes with the surrounding scenery, and refuse construction entirely based on nothing but appearance. 65. More than 78% of Vermont's total land area is classified as woodland, making it the most forested state in America by percentage, and it is not a close competition. Maine carries the northeastern forest reputation, but Vermont is actually winning the percentage comparison by a measurable margin. Every competing state falls short of what Vermont maintains across its relatively small geographic footprint. Humans living in Vermont are essentially guests occupying a small fraction of space that trees have claimed as their permanent majority territory. 66. From inside a Vermont barn. In 1977, Jake Burton Carpenter filed the first United States patent for a snowboard, and then built the entire global snowboarding industry from that exact location. No corporate facility, no engineering team, no investment backing, just a Vermont barn and a person who figured it out by hand. Billions of dollars in annual equipment sales, resort revenue, and Olympic competition all trace their legal and commercial origin directly back to one patent filed from one Vermont barn. 67. Mandatory foraging education is a real requirement in Vermont public elementary schools, where every child must learn to identify edible wild plants as part of the standard curriculum before finishing elementary school. This is not an optional after-school club or an enrichment activity for interested students. Vermont decided that knowing which plants are safe to eat in the woods is fundamental knowledge every child needs, and wrote it into the required curriculum the same way other states require reading and basic arithmetic. 68. Around 8,000 people call Montpelier home, making it the smallest state capital in the entire United States by population and smaller than most American suburbs and countless individual apartment buildings in major cities. 8,000 residents and their town carries the full designation of state capital with every piece of governmental infrastructure that title requires. Visitors arriving from larger state capitals expecting a certain scale and energy find Montpelier waiting for them, looking and feeling like a very well-organized and unusually serious small town. 69. Beneath the picturesque Vermont landscape that most Americans associate with maple syrup and autumn foliage sits the largest deep-cut granite quarry on the entire planet. The Rock of Ages Quarry and Bar is not a regional title or a northeastern distinction, but a worldwide one. Vermont produces more granite per square mile than any other state in America, and does it quietly while the rest of the country pictures covered bridges and dairy farms instead of planetary-scale industrial extraction happening continuously underground. 70. Requiring genetically modified food products to be clearly labeled was Vermont's decision in 2014, and the food industry responded by treating a small state grocery regulation like an existential crisis requiring immediate federal legal action. Vermont had fewer people than most American cities and still managed to trigger a national debate and a federal lawsuit simply by deciding consumers deserved to know what was in their food. The federal government had not reached any consensus on GMO labeling, and Vermont went ahead without waiting. 71. Every photograph of a snowflake you have ever seen in a textbook, a holiday card, or a science classroom traces its visual origin back to Wilson Bentley, a farmer from Jericho, Vermont, who became the first person in history to photograph a single snowflake under a microscope. Between 1885 and 1931, Bentley captured over 5,000 individual snowflake images entirely alone on a farm using equipment he largely taught himself to operate through years of failed attempts before anything actually worked. Vermont was an entire country, banned margarine, elected a dog, and made it illegal to paint a horse. And somehow that is only 71 facts. Every single American state is hiding this level of absolute chaos, and we are going to expose all of them one by one. If Vermont broke your brain, drop a comment telling us which fact destroyed you the most. Subscribe to Dumbest Things right now, because we are just getting started and you cannot afford to miss what comes next.